My husband Harvey died exactly 2 years and 3 months ago. I remember that day in minute detail. Thursday. Rain. The smell of damp earth. Ambulance sirens piercing the silence of our quiet neighborhood in Omaha. A heart attack took him quickly, without warning. 42 years of marriage ended in a matter of minutes. After his death, I thought the hardest part would be falling asleep in an empty bed or cooking dinner for one. I was wrong. The hardest part turned out to be sorting through his belongings and documents. Harvey always handled the finances, and I taught physics at school and trusted him with money matters. I was sitting at his desk, sorting through folders, when I found a key to a safe deposit box. A key I didn't even know existed. The next day, I went to the bank, expecting to find something insignificant, maybe a birth certificate or some old family photos. Instead, I found documents for investment accounts, an insurance policy, and bank statements. Harvey, my simple and frugal Harvey, had left me almost $850,000. I remember sitting in the tiny bank room, staring at the numbers until they began to blur before my eyes. "Mrs. Winthrop, are you all right?" asked the young bank clerk with a concerned expression. "I just didn't know," I whispered, running my fingers over the papers. "Your husband was a very thoughtful man," the clerk said with that special tone people use when talking about the dead. "He ensured your financial security." I nodded, unable to explain that it wasn't about the money. It was about the secret. Why had Harvey never told me about it? We could have traveled, seen the world, enjoyed life together. Instead, we saved on everything, putting money aside for a rainy day that never came. And now I was left alone with a fortune I couldn't share with him. That night, for the first time, I cried not out of grief, but out of anger. A month later, I had grown accustomed to my new financial situation. For the first time in my life, I could afford to live without counting every penny. I started making a list of things I had always wanted to do: travel to Europe, take photography classes, buy the new kitchen cabinets I had been dreaming about for the last 15 years. And then Prue came along. My daughter had always been a difficult child. She grew up to be a demanding woman who never seemed satisfied with what she had. When she was 24, she married Vernon Abbott, a man I never fully understood. He worked as a technical supervisor and had a habit of telling long, detailed stories about his work exploits, which, in his opinion, made him an integral part of the Omaha construction industry. "Mom, you won't believe what happened," Prue said, entering my house without knocking, as she always did. "Vernon's car is having problems, and we need to replace the transmission. It's going to cost $4,000. I looked at her through my reading glasses. "Hello, Prue. It's good to see you, too." She waved her hand as if my greeting were an insignificant detail. "Mom, did you hear what I said?" $4,000. We can't afford that right now." I sighed and put my book down. "What happened to the emergency fund you told me about last month?" Her face tensed slightly. "We used it to pay off the credit card debt. The interest was killing us." "The same credit card debt you promised to pay off with Vernon's bonus?" "The bonus got put on hold," she replied quickly, avoiding my gaze. "It's temporary, Mom. We'll pay it back next month." I'd heard that phrase too many times. After Harvey died, Prue and Vernon started showing up more often, always with a new financial problem that only I could solve. At first, I gave them money without question. They were family, and I thought they really needed help. But days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and I began to notice a pattern. The money was always delayed due to unexpected circumstances. Meanwhile, I saw photos of their trips on social media, new furniture in their home, expensive dinners at restaurants. "Prue, I'm not sure I can help right now," I said, surprised at my own boldness. "I'm thinking about taking photography classes, and they're not cheap. My daughter's expression changed. Photography? At your age? Mom, be realistic. What are you going to do with a camera? You're 67. 67 isn't 107, I replied dryly. I still have time to learn something new. Prue made a sound that could only be interpreted as a disapproving snort. You need to think about the future, Mom, about our future needs. What if something happens to you? Who will take care of you? I almost laughed. She wasn't talking about taking care of me. She was talking about taking care of my money. Money she didn't even know about. I think I can take care of myself, I said, and I'm sorry you're having car trouble, but maybe you should consider more economical transportation options. Prue looked at me as if I had suggested she sell a kidney. You don't understand, Mom. Vernon can't drive to work in something that's beneath his status. What will his colleagues think? I suppressed the urge to ask what was more important, the opinion of his colleagues or financial stability. Instead, I said, I need to think about it, Prue. I can't just write a check for $4,000. She pouted, just like she did when she was a child and didn't get what she wanted. Fine, but don't take too long. Vernon is nervous about the whole situation. After she left, I sat down at the computer and opened my bank account. I've never been particularly tech-savvy, but after Harvey died, I had to learn a lot of things. I looked at my savings and made a decision. The next day, I opened a joint account with limited access for Prue. I put $2,000 in it and gave her a card. This is for emergencies only, I explained as we sat in the bank. Real emergencies, Prue, not for dinners at restaurants or new clothes. She looked both annoyed and pleased, like someone who had gotten less than she expected, but still gotten something. Of course, Mom, only for emergencies. I should have known that this was just the beginning of the problems. Over the next few weeks, I began to notice strange transactions on the joint account. Small amounts at clothing stores, restaurant bills, nothing obviously outrageous, but clearly not emergencies. When I asked Prue about these expenses, she always had an excuse. The clothes were for an important work event. The restaurant was for a business dinner where Vernon was meeting with important clients. Each time she promised to pay me back, and each time the promise went unfulfilled. Meanwhile, I continued to live my life, trying to adjust to being alone. I started meeting with a group of other widows and widowers at the local community center. We drank coffee, played cards, and shared stories about our deceased spouses. It helped, but it didn't fill the void Harvey had left. I often thought about what Harvey would say about the situation with Prue. He was always gentler with her, always willing to give her another chance. She's just trying to find her way, he would say when she disappointed us yet again. But even his patience was not limitless. One evening, while checking our joint account, I noticed a withdrawal of $1,000. No explanation, no description of the transaction, just a cash withdrawal. I called Prue immediately. Why did you need $1,000 in cash? I asked, trying to remain calm. The pause on the other end of the line lasted too long. It's for roof repairs, she finally said. Our roof is leaking, and the contractor prefers cash. A contractor who repairs a roof for $1,000 and prefers cash sounds suspicious, I said. And why didn't you call me before withdrawing such a large amount? It was an emergency, Mom, she said, her voice tinged with irritation. Isn't that what the account is for? For emergencies? I sighed. Yes, but I expected you to tell me before you used it, and I'd like to see the invoice from this contractor. Don't you trust me? Her voice now sounded hurt. Do you think I'm lying to you about the leaky roof? I'm not saying you're lying, Prue. I just want to see where the money is going. Fine. Her tone turned cold. I'll send you the invoice tomorrow. She hung up, and I sat there with the phone in my hand, feeling a knot growing in my stomach. Of course, I never received any invoice, and when I stopped by a few days later, I saw no signs of roof repairs. I began to seriously doubt my decision to open a joint account. Maybe I was too trusting, or maybe I just didn't want to admit that my daughter was using me. In any case, I knew something had to change, but I had no idea how serious the situation would become in the coming weeks. I have never been someone who loses their temper easily. My students at school always marveled at how calmly I reacted to their antics. "You have nerves of steel, Mrs. Winthrop," they would say. But those nerves began to fray when I checked the joint account statement for the third time that week. The list of transactions included purchases at cosmetic stores, a jewelry boutique, and even a wine shop. The total amount was close to $800. I sat at the kitchen table, clutching my glasses in my hand, trying to suppress my growing irritation. This was an emergency account, not Prue's personal credit card. I dialed her number, determined not to let myself be talked out of it this time. "Hi, Mom," she answered after the fourth ring, her voice sounding tense. "Prue, I'm looking at your account statement," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. "There are a lot of purchases here that are hard to call emergencies." "Oh, that," she laughed, but it sounded fake. Vernon had an important corporate dinner, and I needed to look presentable. You know how important that is for his career. "And that's why you needed $120 earrings and $75 wine?" I tried not to sound sarcastic, but I didn't succeed. "Mom, it's an investment in our future," she said defensively. "If Vernon makes a good impression, he might get a promotion. Then we can pay you back everything and more." I took a deep breath and counted to 10. "Prue, when I opened this account, we agreed it would only be used in emergencies. New earrings are not an emergency. You just don't understand how the modern world works," she said with a note of condescension in her voice that always annoyed me. "Appearances are everything. If we don't look successful, we'll never be successful." "I understand perfectly well how the world works," I replied, "and I know that living beyond your means is a direct path to financial problems. Prue, I want you to return that money to the account within a week." There was a long pause. "You're putting me in a very awkward position." "No, you put yourself in an awkward position when you decided to use my money without permission," I said, not raising my voice, but each word was firmer than the last. "Okay," she finally said. "I'll return the money, but don't expect it to happen instantly. We have bills to pay, too." After that conversation, our relationship became even more strained. Prue stopped dropping by unannounced. Our phone conversations became short and formal. She didn't return the money after a week, or two. When a month had passed, I decided to take action. I called the bank and changed the terms of the joint account. Now, any withdrawal required my consent. I also set a daily spending limit of $50. It was a harsh move, but I felt I had no choice. When Prue discovered the changes, she called me in a rage. "You can't do this to me," she yelled into the phone. "I'm not a child who needs permission to spend money." "Then don't act like a child," I replied calmly. "Return the money you took without permission, and we'll talk about changing the terms." "You're becoming as stingy as Dad," she spat, knowing it would hurt me. I swallowed my hurt. "Your father wasn't stingy, Prue. He was cautious, and now I understand why." She hung up without saying goodbye. I expected her to avoid me after that, but to my surprise, a couple of days later, I received an invitation to a family dinner. "Vernon and I want to make amends," Prue said when she called with the invitation. "I realize I was a little harsh. Let's just forget about it and start with a clean slate." I agreed, albeit with some suspicion. In 42 years of motherhood, I've learned to recognize when Prue is up to something. On Friday evening, I parked in front of their house in the suburbs of Omaha. It was a beautiful two-story house with a well-manicured lawn. Too big and expensive for their income, as I had always thought, but Prue insisted that they deserved to live in a nice neighborhood. Vernon opened the door with a broad smile that didn't reach his eyes. Beverly! He hugged me with exaggerated warmth. How wonderful to see you! I let him hug me, keeping a polite smile on my face. Vernon always overdid it when he wanted to impress. Prue appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Mom, you're right on time. Dinner is almost ready. I walked into the living room, noting the new leather sofa and armchair that hadn't been there on my last visit. I wonder how many credit cards they used for this purchase. Nice sofa, I said, running my hand over the soft leather. New? Yes. Vernon plopped down on it, spreading his legs wide. We bought it on sale last month. What a great deal. I doubted that even with the discount this sofa could be called a great deal. But I kept quiet. Dinner was exceptionally delicious. Prue made steaks, baked potatoes, and an avocado salad. Vernon opened a bottle of expensive red wine, explaining how his colleague, a true wine connoisseur, had recommended this particular variety. We talked about the weather, neighbors, and the latest city news, avoiding the topic of money. I was almost relaxed when Vernon cleared his throat and said, Beverly, we have some great news. I raised an eyebrow, waiting for him to continue. I'm getting a promotion, he said, his chest swelling with pride. Senior Technical Inspector. That means more responsibility, more prestige, and of course, more money. Congratulations, I said, genuinely happy for him. That sounds wonderful. Oh, this is just the beginning. Vernon took a sip of wine, clearly enjoying the moment. With my experience and connections, I could reach a management position in a couple of years. Can you imagine? Vernon Abbott, Head of Technical Supervision. That sounds impressive, I smiled, noticing how Prue looked at her husband with obvious adoration. She always believed in his exaggerated promises of future wealth. Of course, with a new position comes new responsibilities, Vernon continued, refilling my glass even though I had barely touched the previous one. I have to look the part. You can't show up to important meetings in an old car. So, that's it. I was beginning to see where this conversation was going. Oh? I pretended not to understand the hint. What's wrong with your current car? God, Mom, Prue interjected. It's 6 years old, and it's a Honda. Vernon is now in a position where he needs something more prestigious. And what are you planning to buy? I tried to keep my question neutral. Vernon smiled broadly. I'm looking at Audis, or maybe a BMW, something that says, I'm a successful professional. Those are pretty expensive cars, I remarked. Are you sure it's a wise investment? It's not just an investment, Beverly. Vernon frowned slightly. It's a statement. When I drive up to the construction site in an Audi, people immediately understand who they're dealing with. And have you already decided how you're going to finance this purchase? I cut a small piece of steak, avoiding looking at my daughter. We're taking out a car loan, Prue said quickly, before Vernon could answer. Everything's under control. A car loan? Vernon looked surprised, but quickly regained his composure. Yes, of course, a car loan. With my new promotion, we can easily afford the monthly payments. I noticed the brief glance they exchanged. Something didn't add up. And when are you planning to make this purchase? I continued to ask questions, feeling that I was getting closer to the truth. In the next few weeks, Vernon took a big sip of wine. I've already test-driven several models. You know, I was particularly impressed with the new Audi A6. The interior is simply stunning. Leather seats, wood trim, panoramic roof. He continued to list the car's features, but I was no longer listening. I watched Prue, who was becoming increasingly restless as Vernon spoke. She tried twice to change the subject, but he was too absorbed in his automotive fantasies. And with 300 horsepower, I'll be at work in minutes. He finished with a satisfied smile. That sounds very expensive, I said. Quality costs money, Beverly. Vernon shrugged slightly. Besides, I've earned it after all these years of hard work. Prue suddenly stood up. Who wants dessert? I made cheesecake. She quickly cleared the plates and disappeared into the kitchen, clearly trying to interrupt the conversation. Vernon, I said when we were alone, I have to ask, can you really afford such an expensive car, even with your raise? His face tensed slightly. Of course we can. I told you we're taking out a loan. Everything's under control. What about the down payment? I pressed. Usually, cars like this require a significant down payment. We have savings, he replied curtly, and I knew he was lying. They never had savings. Prue returned with dessert, and the conversation shifted to safer topics. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. They were clearly hiding something. When I was about to leave, Prue walked me to the door. Thanks for coming, Mom. It was nice to spend time together without arguing about money. Yes, it was nice, I agreed. Prue, can I ask you a direct question? She tensed. Of course. Are you really going to take out a car loan for this car? Or do you have another plan that you're not telling me about? Mom! She looked offended. Of course we're taking out a loan. What else could we do? I studied her face closely. Prue had always been a poor liar. Even as a child, I could always tell when she wasn't telling the truth. She would get a slight twitch under her left eye. And now it was there. I don't know, I said, but I hope you're not planning any financial adventures. Everything's under control, she repeated Vernon's words. Don't worry about us. I hugged her goodbye and got into my modest but reliable Toyota. I thought about the situation all the way home. My maternal instincts screamed that something was wrong. Prue had never been good with money, and I doubted she had suddenly learned financial responsibility. The next morning, I called the bank and checked the balance of our joint account. The balance hadn't changed, not yet, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. I decided to stay alert. If Prue really planned to use my money for the down payment on Vernon's car, she was in for a surprise. I was prepared to defend my finances, even if it meant confronting my own daughter. On Wednesday morning, I woke up with a headache. It was drizzling outside, and the gray sky hung over Omaha like a threat of trouble. I took 2 aspirin, had toast and jam for breakfast, and decided that the weather would not interfere with my plans for the day. My friend Elaine had recently moved to a new neighborhood on the west side of town. We agreed to meet at her house at 11 in the morning to have lunch and see her new garden, which she was so proud of. I could already imagine her talking enthusiastically about each plant as if they were her children. Elaine had always been a little obsessed with her hobbies. I put on a blue cardigan, grabbed my umbrella, and got in the car. The navigation system showed that Elaine's house was about a 25-minute drive away. I had enough time to stop at a gas station and maybe buy a small gift for my friend. Once I got on the main road, I turned on the radio. The announcer cheerfully reported on traffic jams in the city center due to road repairs. I mentally thanked myself for retiring and no longer having to drive to school every morning. After filling up the car, I decided to stop by the mall to buy a gift for Elaine. Maybe a nice pot for her plants, or a book on gardening. The mall was close by, just a couple of blocks from the gas station. As I approached the mall, I noticed a large car dealership with bright flags and balloons. They were obviously having some kind of promotion. Shiny new cars were visible through the huge glass windows. I automatically slowed down as I looked at the display. And then I saw her. My daughter, Prue, was standing next to a gleaming black Audi, gesturing animatedly as she talked to a salesman in a suit. Next to her, with a smug smile on his face, stood Vernon, stroking the hood of the car as if it already belonged to him. I instinctively turned into the car dealership's parking lot and stopped in the far corner. My heart was beating faster than usual. What were they doing here? Were they really buying this car? I turned off the engine and remained seated in the car, watching through the windshield. The rain intensified, drumming on the roof and providing perfect cover. Through the streams of water on the glass, I saw Prue and Vernon follow the salesman into the office at the back of the showroom. Part of me wanted to drive away. It's none of my business how grown-ups spend their money. If they decided to take on excessive debt for the sake of a status symbol, that's their choice and their consequences. But another part of me, the part that had taught physics for years and learned to notice patterns, couldn't shake my suspicions. There were too many inconsistencies in their story about the car loan. Prue had been acting too nervous during our last dinner. I decided to check my intuition. I took out my phone, opened the bank app, and checked our joint account. The balance remained the same. But what if they were planning to use the card today, right now? The rain had eased off a little, and I decided to act. Pulling the hood of my cardigan over my head, I got out of the car and walked quickly to the entrance of the car dealership. Inside, it was warm and dry, smelling of new leather and polish. Several salespeople were chatting with customers, but no one paid any attention to me. I walked along the row of cars on display, trying to look like a regular customer. At the back of the showroom were small glass offices where paperwork was probably being done. In one of them, I noticed Prue and Vernon. They were sitting across from a salesperson, studying some papers. I moved closer, trying to remain unnoticed. Vernon looked excited, nodding in response to the salesman's words. Prue seemed more tense. She was nervously fiddling with the strap of her bag, and I noticed her knees shaking under the table, a sure sign of her anxiety. I managed to position myself behind a brochure stand, close enough to hear snippets of their conversation. The down payment is 20% of the car's value, the salesman said. This is standard practice for premium cars. No problem. Vernon leaned back in his chair with the air of a man accustomed to luxury. We're all set. The salesman smiled. Great. Then we just need to confirm the payment, and you can drive away in your new Audi today. Prue opened her purse and took out a familiar plastic rectangle, our joint account card. My heart skipped a beat. So that's how they plan to pay the down payment, with my money. I didn't wait to hear the rest. I quickly and quietly made my way to the exit, trying not to attract attention. Leaving the dealership, I practically ran to my car, ignoring the rain. Once I was safely in my car, I immediately dialed the bank's number. After a few rings, a polite female voice answered. Omaha City Bank, how can I help you? Hello, my name is Beverly Winthrop. I tried to speak calmly, but my voice was trembling slightly. I need to block my joint account card immediately. Of course, Mrs. Winthrop. May I ask you to provide some information for verification? I answered the standard questions about my date of birth, address, and passcode. Every second felt like an eternity. What if Prue had already made a transaction? Thank you for confirming, Mrs. Winthrop, said the bank employee. May I ask the reason for the block? I suspect unauthorized use, I replied, deciding not to get into family details. I see. I'll block the card immediately. Would you also like to file a fraud report? I paused for a moment. Was this fraud in the legal sense? Prue had access to the account, albeit with restrictions. No, that's not necessary, I finally said. Just block the card. The card is blocked, Mrs. Winthrop. Any attempts to use it will be declined. Would you like a new card? No, thank you. I felt a strange sense of relief. I'll think about it later. After ending the call, I leaned back in my seat and took a deep breath. The clock read 10:50. I was late for my meeting with Elaine, but that seemed like the least of my problems right now. I dialed my friend's number and explained that I would be a little late due to unforeseen circumstances. Elaine, always understanding, said she would wait for me until dinner. Leaving the car dealership parking lot, I decided to stop by the mall and buy a gift for Elaine to take my mind off what had happened. I chose a beautiful ceramic vase and a book on growing exotic plants at home. On the way to Elaine's, I tried to predict Prue's reaction to the card being blocked. She would be furious, no doubt about it. Vernon would be too. They would surely try to blame me for all the deadly sins. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was doing the right thing. I was setting boundaries that should have been set years ago. The meeting with Elaine went well, although I couldn't fully concentrate on her stories about the garden. My thoughts kept returning to the scene at the car dealership. Elaine, noticing my distraction, asked if everything was all right. Family problems, I replied evasively. Nothing I can't handle. She nodded understandingly and didn't ask any further questions. I was grateful to her for that. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, when I returned home, I had 5 missed calls from Prue and 3 voicemails on my phone. I decided to change my clothes and make a cup of tea before diving into the inevitable conflict. I had just sat down in my chair with my cup of tea when the phone rang again. Prue's name appeared on the screen. Taking a deep breath, I answered. Mom! Her voice sounded high-pitched and tense. What have you done? Hello, Prue. I tried to speak calmly. What are you talking about? Don't pretend, she almost shouted. You blocked the card. I stood there like a complete idiot when the transaction didn't go through. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was? No less humiliating than finding out that my daughter is trying to use my money without permission to buy a luxury car, I replied in an even tone. What? There was false surprise in her voice. What are you talking about? Prue, I saw you at the car dealership. I saw you trying to use the card for a down payment. There was a short pause. Were you following me? Her voice now sounded accusatory. No, I was just driving by. I was on my way to Elaine's. And you decided to spy on me? She went on the offensive, a classic tactic of Prue's when she was caught in a lie. That's disgusting, Mom. I'm an adult. Adults don't lie to their parents and use their money without permission. I took a sip of tea, feeling the adrenaline gradually leave my body. We talked about this, Prue. That account was for emergencies, not for buying an Audi. It was an emergency. She raised her voice again. Vernon has important clients. He needs that car for work. Then you should have taken out a car loan like you said you would. I kept my voice steady. Or saved up for the down payment yourself. We were going to pay it back. Tears welled up in her eyes. As soon as Vernon got his bonus. The same bonus you promised to use to pay back your previous loans? I couldn't hold back the sarcasm. The one that somehow never materializes? You're just. She was choking with indignation. You're being awful after everything we've done for you. I almost laughed. And what have you done for me, Prue? We visit you. We invite you to dinner. We don't leave you a lonely old woman. Her words stung, but I didn't show it. And all that only when you need something from me. That's not true, she sniffed. You're being unfair. Prue, let's be honest with each other. You tried to use my money without permission. That's unfair and disrespectful. I have a right to protect my finances. Vernon is furious. Her tone suddenly changed, becoming almost threatening. He wants to talk to you. Before I could respond, there was a noise on the line, and Vernon's voice filled my ear. Beverly, his usual friendly tone disappeared, giving way to cold fury. Do you realize what you just did? You put me in an incredibly awkward position. Good afternoon, Vernon. I remained calm. I'm sorry it turned out this way, but you're not sorry. he interrupted me. If you were sorry, you would immediately unblock the card and let us complete the transaction. I can't do that, I said firmly. That account is not for buying cars. Do you realize that you made me look like a complete idiot? He almost shouted. The salesman must have thought I was some kind of beggar who couldn't afford a decent car. If you can't afford this car without my help, maybe you should choose something more affordable, I suggested. Don't you dare tell me what I can afford. He was furious. I make enough money. That down payment was just a temporary measure. Then you shouldn't have any trouble getting a bank loan. Banks with their bureaucracy take weeks to process. He exhaled irritably. I didn't have time to wait. This model has special features, and it could have been bought at any moment. I'm very sorry, Vernon, but I won't change my mind. My voice was quiet but firm. Using my money without permission is unacceptable. You're a selfish old hag. His words were sharp as a knife. You sit on your pile of money while your own daughter and son-in-law are trying to build a decent life. I felt my face flush with anger. How did you find out about my money? There was a short pause. Prue told me, he finally said, and I heard my daughter's indignant exclamation in the background. She saw your bank statements when she was at your place. You're hiding hundreds of thousands while we're barely making ends meet. You're barely making ends meet because you live beyond your means. I tried to remain calm, even though I was boiling inside. And I'm not obligated to pay for your reckless behavior. It's Harvey's money, Vernon shouted. Do you think he would want you to keep it instead of helping your family? That was too much. Don't you dare tell me what Harvey would want. My voice turned icy. You didn't even know him. I know he wasn't as stingy as you are. Enough. I straightened up in my chair. I'm not going to continue this conversation. The card will remain blocked. If you want a car, find another way to pay for it. That's my final decision. You'll regret this. Vernon's voice became quiet and threatening. You can't treat us like this. We're your family. Families don't try to deceive each other, I replied. Call me when you're ready to have a civilized conversation. I hung up before he could answer and turned off my phone. My hands were shaking slightly, but not from fear, from adrenaline. For the first time in many years, I felt like I was really standing up for myself. After finishing my cold tea, I decided it was time to take more decisive action. They had crossed the line, and ordinary conversations would no longer help. I needed to protect not only my finances, but also my dignity. Tomorrow, I would go to the bank and close the joint account. And then I would have to seriously rethink my relationship with my daughter and son-in-law. They had made it clear that they saw me not as a mother and mother-in-law, but only as a source of money. Everything had changed, and there was no turning back. I spent the next few days after the incident at the car dealership in silence. My phone was silent. No calls or messages from Prue or Vernon. This lull was deceptive. I knew it. They were just regrouping, planning a new strategy. In 42 years of motherhood, I had learned all of Prue's tactics. Now she was giving me time to feel guilty. On Friday morning, I went to the bank and closed our joint account. The young clerk with neatly styled hair raised her eyebrows in surprise when I explained my request. Are you sure, Mrs. Winthrop? She asked. Usually joint accounts are only closed in the event of divorce or… She paused, clearly unwilling to say the word death. I'm sure, I replied firmly, and I'd like to transfer the remaining funds to my personal account. She nodded and began filling out the paperwork. I felt a strange lightness as I signed the papers. It was as if I were cutting the invisible umbilical cord that still tied me to Prue, a cord that should have been cut years ago. When I got home, I found a bouquet of flowers on my doorstep. Lush white lilies, my favorite. Attached to them was a card that read, Mom, we need to talk. Love, Prue. I took the flowers to the kitchen and put them in a vase. It was the first step in her usual pattern: anger, then silence, then a conciliatory gesture, usually accompanied by tears and promises. I knew this scenario by heart, but now I saw it with a clarity I hadn't had before. The phone rang as I was slicing a cucumber for the salad. It was Prue's number. I took a deep breath and answered. "Hi, Mom." Her voice was soft, almost timid. "Did you get the flowers?" "Yes, thank you." I tried to sound neutral. "They're beautiful." "Mom, I want to apologize." She paused, and I heard a slight tremor in her voice. "What Vernon and I did, it was wrong. We shouldn't have tried to use your money without permission." I remained silent, waiting for her to continue. In the past, I would have immediately accepted the apology, eager for a quick reconciliation, but not now. "We were desperate," she continued. "Vernon is having problems at work. His boss is threatening to demote him if he doesn't start looking more presentable. You know how important the outward trappings of success are in their business." "I understand," I said, "but that doesn't justify deception." "I know." Her voice grew even quieter. "I'm so ashamed. Vernon and I talked and decided we had to make things right. He wants to apologize in person." And there it was, an invitation to return to the way things were. They would apologize, I would forgive them, and the wheel would keep turning. "Prue, I appreciate your apology," I said after a pause, "but I need time to think about the situation. I closed our joint account." "What?" Her voice changed instantly. "Why did you do that?" "Because I no longer trust you with financial matters," I replied honestly. "Mom, this is just," she faltered. "You can't do this to me. What if I have an emergency?" "Then you'll call me and we'll discuss it," I said. "But you won't have blind access to my money anymore." There was a long pause. "Fine," she finally said with poorly concealed irritation. "If that's what you want, but we still want to invite you to dinner on Sunday, so we can discuss everything in person." I agreed, albeit with some internal doubts. After ending the conversation, I called my sister Audrey. She was 3 years younger than me, lived in Des Moines, and always offered a sober perspective on situations. "They tried what?" she exclaimed when I told her what had happened. "Beverly, that's crossing the line." "I know," I sighed, "but Prue says they're sorry." "Of course they're sorry. They're sorry they got caught." Audrey snorted. "Listen, sis, you've let them walk all over you for too long. Ever since Harvey died, they've seen you as nothing more than an ATM." Her bluntness was painful but necessary. "Do you think I shouldn't go to this dinner?" "No, go," she said, "but be on your guard. They'll try to manipulate you. Vernon will feign remorse, Prue will shed tears, and before you know what's happening, you'll be writing them a check again." "Not this time," I said firmly. "Glad to hear it," she said approvingly. "Keep me posted, and if you need moral support, I'm always here for you." After talking to Audrey, I felt more confident. I'm not the only one who sees the toxicity in Prue and Vernon's behavior. On Sunday evening, I found myself back at their house. Prue greeted me with exaggerated affection, hugging me so tightly it was as if we hadn't seen each other in years. Vernon was all smiles, offering drinks and compliments. "Beverly, you look stunning," he said, helping me take off my coat. "That color suits you very well." Dinner was simple but clearly carefully prepared. Baked chicken, mashed potatoes, fresh salad. My favorite dishes. They had tried very hard. "Mom," Prue began after the main course, her voice soft. "Vernon and I have been thinking a lot about what happened." I waited silently for her to continue. "What we did was wrong," Vernon interjected, his face expressing sincere remorse. "I let my pride get the better of my common sense. That car, it seemed like a symbol of what I had achieved in life." "We never meant to hurt you," added Prue, her eyes filling with tears. You've done so much for us. We just got confused. I accept your apology, I said, taking a sip of water. But I need to know that this won't happen again. Of course it won't. Vernon nodded vigorously. We've learned our lesson. Family is more important than material things. We'll start with a clean slate. Prue took my hand. Everything will be different, I promise. I looked at their sincere faces, and part of me wanted to believe them, but a nagging doubt remained. How many times had I heard promises like this before? I'm glad to hear that, I said, but understanding takes time. Trust needs to be rebuilt. Their faces tensed slightly. Of course, Mom, we understand. Prue squeezed my hand. By the way, since we're on the subject, we've had a little problem with the mortgage. There it was. I almost laughed. Less than 10 minutes after apologizing, they were already moving on to their next request for money. The bank raised the interest rate, and our monthly payment went up by $300, she continued. It's temporary, of course, as soon as Vernon gets a raise. Prue, I interrupted her gently. I thought we just talked about changing everything. Yes, but this is an emergency. Her tone became defensive. We could lose our house. Vernon looked worried. Beverly, we're not asking for much, just a little help to get through a difficult period. What about cutting back on expenses? I suggested. Maybe cancel cable TV or eat out less often? Prue looked at me as if I had suggested she sell a kidney. We've already cut our budget to the bone. I doubted that, considering the new leather sofa and plasma TV on the wall. I'm sorry, but I can't help you, I said firmly. You need to find another solution. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. The warm smiles disappeared, replaced by tense stares. I can't believe you're turning us down, Prue said, her voice tinged with hurt. After everything we've done for you. And what have you done for me, Prue? I asked. She faltered, clearly unprepared for such a question. We're always there for you. We're your family. Family isn't just about demanding help, it's about offering it, I said. When was the last time you took an interest in my life, my problems, my needs? You don't have any problems, she exclaimed. You have money. I shook my head. Life isn't just about money, Prue. Easy to say when you have plenty, Vernon interjected, his voice turning cold. You're sitting on a fortune while your own daughter struggles to make ends meet. You're not making ends meet because you're living beyond your means, I replied, and it's not my responsibility to finance your lifestyle. So now I'm your lifestyle? Prue jumped up from the table. Your own daughter. I'm not some kind of burden. I never said you were a burden. I remained calm. I'm just setting healthy financial boundaries. Healthy boundaries? Vernon snorted. That's called stinginess, Beverly. Or would you prefer the term financial abuse? I looked at him in surprise. Financial abuse? Refusing to give money to adults is abuse. Yes, when those adults are your family in desperate need. He raised his voice. You're literally leaving us homeless. I shook my head. You won't be left homeless if you live within your means. You have no heart, Prue whispered, her eyes filling with tears. You've changed since Dad died. You've become cold and calculating. It was a low blow, and she knew it. I took a deep breath and counted to 10. I think it's time for me to go, I said, getting up from the table. This conversation is going nowhere. Sure, run away. Prue crossed her arms over her chest. You always do that when the conversation gets difficult. I paused, surprised by her words. What do you mean? All my life, when problems arose, you just closed yourself off. Her voice trembled with emotion. Dad was the only one who was really there, who listened. You were always too busy with your students, your books, your life. I felt a lump rise in my throat. That's not true, Prue. I was always there for you. No, you weren't, she almost shouted. You were physically there, but emotionally, never. And now that you have money, you're using it as a weapon against me. I looked at my daughter, her face contorted with anger, and didn't recognize her. Or maybe I just never wanted to see that side of her. I'm not using money as a weapon, I said quietly. I'm just refusing to be used. Used? Vernon intervened, his voice full of indignation. We are your family, the only family you have left. Do you want to spend the rest of your days alone? Because that's what will happen if you continue in this vein. It was a thinly veiled threat. Give us money or you'll be left alone. I felt something inside me finally break, the last thread connecting me to the illusion of our happy family. If your love depends on whether I give you money, I said, looking them in the eye, then it's not love. I turned and headed for the door. Wait! Prue rushed after me. You can't just leave. We're not done yet. I am done, I said, putting on my coat. I will no longer participate in these manipulations. Manipulations? She looked genuinely shocked. You call our family a manipulation? No, Prue, I call it manipulation when you try to use guilt and fear of loneliness to get me to give you money. Vernon appeared in the hallway, his face red with anger. Fine, leave, but don't come crying to me when you realize you have nothing but money. No friends, no family, nothing. I looked at him with pity. I have much more than you think, Vernon, and certainly more than money. I walked out, closing the door behind me, and heard something crash against the wall. Prue had always been prone to dramatic gestures. Sitting in the car, I felt a strange mixture of emotions: sadness, relief, anger, liberation. It was as if I had thrown off a heavy backpack that I had been carrying for years. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of the phone ringing. It was my niece, Lisa, Audrey's daughter. Aunt Bev, what's going on? She asked without preamble. Prue called Mom all night, crying and saying that you had disowned the family and left them without support. I sighed and told her my version of events. Lisa listened attentively, occasionally uttering sounds of surprise or indignation. That's crazy, she said when I finished. Prue has always been selfish, but this is a new level. Your mother said the same thing, I smiled weakly. Mom is on your side, don't worry, Lisa assured me. She's just tired of Prue's calls. At some point, she just turned off her phone. I laughed, imagining Audrey, always straightforward and decisive, simply pressing the off button in the middle of Prue's tirade. What about you? I asked. Don't you think I'm being too harsh? Aunt Bev, you've been too soft for too long, Lisa said seriously. Prue has been using you for years, and the more you gave, the more she demanded. It's time to put an end to this. Her words confirmed what I already knew deep down. All these years, I had allowed Prue to manipulate me out of fear of losing her love. But now I could see the truth. What she offered was not real love. It was a transaction in which my role was to give without expecting anything in return except temporary approval. Thank you, Lisa, I said sincerely. You have no idea how much your support means to me. You're welcome, Aunt Bev. Her voice softened. And know that you are not alone. You have Mom and me, and we will always be on your side. After talking to Lisa, I felt a surge of determination. I opened my desk drawer and took out a notebook. On a blank page, I began to list all the times Prue and Vernon had asked me for money over the past 2 years. A loan for bathroom renovations that never happened. Money for Vernon's emergency dental treatment, after which he somehow appeared with a new expensive watch. Temporary help with paying bills, which became permanent. The list took up 2 pages, and with each line, I saw more clearly the picture of exploitation in which I had willingly participated. I wasn't just a generous mother, I was an ATM that they used without the slightest respect or gratitude. And the saddest thing was that I allowed this to happen, turning a blind eye to the obvious signs. But no more. It was time to start a new chapter in my life, a chapter in which I valued myself enough to demand respect from others, even if those others were my own family. I glanced at my phone, 5 more missed calls from Prue. I didn't call back. Instead, I opened my laptop and started looking for information about photography classes at the local community center. It was something I had dreamed of doing for years, and now, freed from emotional manipulation, I could finally do it for myself. On Wednesday morning, 2 weeks after the disastrous family dinner, I woke up with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in a long time. That night, for the first time in many days, I slept without sleeping pills. No disturbing dreams, no insomnia, just deep, restorative sleep. The calls from Prue didn't stop. At first, they were angry, full of accusations and threats. Then they became tearful and self-pitying. How can you do this to us? You only think about yourself. What will people say? I stopped answering after the third day, when I realized that every conversation followed the same tiresome pattern. Vernon called too, his tone fluctuating between threatening and ingratiating, depending on the time of day and, probably, how much he had drunk. Twice I found their car parked on my street. They were watching my house but didn't dare to approach. It was time to take more radical measures. After breakfast, I made a to-do list for the day. First, change my phone number. Second, consult a lawyer. Third, check the locks and alarm system. I wasn't paranoid, but I knew that Prue had a key to my house, which I had given her just in case. Given recent events, that key had to be neutralized. At the cell phone store, a young employee with tattoos on his arms raised his eyebrows in surprise when I explained that I wanted to change the number I had been using for almost 15 years. "Are you sure? That's a pretty radical step," he said, adjusting his thick-rimmed glasses. "All your contacts will lose the ability to reach you?" "That's exactly what I'm trying to achieve," I replied with a smile. "At least from some contacts." He nodded understandingly. "Toxic relationships?" I was surprised by his insight. "Something like that. My mom did the same thing recently." He began filling out the paperwork. "My father terrorized her with phone calls for years. The new number changed her life." An hour later, I left the store with a new phone number and a strange feeling of freedom. The old SIM card lay cut up in the trash can. I sent short messages with my new number to a few close friends: Audrey, Lisa, a couple of friends from the widows group, and my former colleague Harold, whom I sometimes met for lunch. That was it. No Prue, no Vernon. My next stop was the law firm Bronson and Associates. I chose it because several of my acquaintances recommended it as a place where elderly clients are treated with respect, not as senile old people. Lawrence Bronson turned out to be a thin man of about 55, with attentive eyes and a manner of listening carefully without interrupting. I told him about my situation, not omitting any details about Prue and Vernon's financial manipulations. "Unfortunately, this is not uncommon," he said when I finished. "Financial abuse of elderly parents is a common problem. It's good that you've come for help." "I don't feel old," I remarked with slight irritation. He smiled. "Of course not. I'm just using legal terminology. In the eyes of the law, you are considered a senior citizen, which gives you certain additional protections." "I don't need additional protections," I said. "I need to know how to legally protect myself from my own daughter." Mr. Bronson nodded and began to explain my options. The first was a formal cease and desist letter from a law firm demanding that she cease contact. The second was a legal notice prohibiting her from entering my property. The third, if the situation worsened, was a court injunction. I hope it doesn't come to that, he said, but it's good to know all the options. We also discussed the need to update my will. After Harvey's death, I had simply left everything as it was. All assets went to Prue. Now I realized that this needed to be revised. Do you have other relatives you would like to leave something to? Mr. Bronson asked. I thought about it. My sister Audrey, her daughter Lisa, perhaps some of the charities Harvey supported. All right, he made notes in his notebook. We'll prepare a draft of a new will. I would also recommend a power of attorney in case of incapacity, a document that will determine who will make medical and financial decisions for you if you are unable to do so. Not Prue, that's for sure, I muttered. Mr. Bronson smiled understandingly. That's your decision. Many people choose close friends or other relatives. I paid the initial fee for legal services and left feeling like I had taken control of the situation. On the way home, I stopped by a locksmith and ordered new locks. He promised to come tomorrow. In the evening, I received my first email from Prue. She must have realized that I had changed my phone number. Mom, why aren't you answering? Your phone isn't working. Vernon and I are very worried. Please contact us immediately. I didn't reply, but I saved the email. Mr. Bronson advised me to document all contact in case it was needed in the future. The next morning, a locksmith replaced all the locks in my house. He also installed a chain on the front door and checked the windows. By noon, my house was securely protected, and only I had access to it. After the locksmith left, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. It had never occurred to me that one day I would have to protect my home from my own daughter. But here I was, a 67-year-old woman barricading herself against her family. The doorbell rang around 4 in the afternoon. Through the peephole, I saw the mailman with a registered package that needed to be signed for. When I opened the door, I found not the mailman, but Prue and Vernon. Finally, Prue exclaimed, trying to squeeze through the door. We've been trying to reach you for days. I instinctively put my arm out, blocking the entrance. Prue, I didn't invite you. You changed your phone number. Her voice trembled with indignation. You blocked us. What kind of childish games are these? Vernon stood behind her, his face a frozen mask of irritation. Beverly, we need to talk. You can't just cut us out of your life. I can, and I did, I replied, surprised at my own calmness. Please leave. I don't want to talk to you right now. Did you change the locks? Prue noticed the new lock. Seriously, Mom, what's next? Barbed wire? Prue, I'm asking you to leave. My voice was firm. This is my house, and I have the right to decide who comes in. Vernon took a step forward, his posture threatening. We're not going anywhere until we talk. You can't just disappear from our lives. I can and I will if you continue like this. I began to close the door. Vernon suddenly put his foot out, blocking the door. No, Beverly, you're going to listen to us. I felt my heart racing with fear, but I tried not to show it. Get your foot out of my door, or I'll call the police. Go ahead, Prue exclaimed. What are you going to tell them? That your daughter wants to talk to you? They'll laugh at you. I'll tell them that uninvited guests are refusing to leave my property, I replied, reaching for the phone. And that one of them is physically preventing me from closing my door. That's called trespassing, Prue. Her expression changed when she saw that I was actually dialing the number. You wouldn't dare. Emergency services, how can I help you? A voice came over the line. Hello, I said clearly. My name is Beverly Winthrop, and I live at 1256 Maple Street. There are 2 people at my door who refuse to leave and are physically preventing me from closing my door. I fear for my safety. You're crazy, Prue hissed, but I saw the panic in her eyes. The dispatcher asked if I knew these people. Yes, they are my daughter and her husband, I replied, but they are uninvited and refuse to leave after my request. Okay, Mrs. Winthrop, we are sending a patrol. Can you safely close the door? No, one of them is blocking the door with his foot. Vernon, who had been listening to my conversation, finally moved his foot. His face was red with anger. You really called the cops on your son-in-law? Are you out of your mind, old woman? I can close the door now, I told the dispatcher, but they're still on my porch. Stay inside, lock the door, and wait for the police to arrive, the dispatcher advised. I closed the door and turned the lock, ignoring Prue's shouting and banging. Through the door, I could hear their heated argument. Vernon wanted to leave before the police arrived, and Prue insisted that they stay and deal with this. The police arrived surprisingly quickly, in just 10 minutes. Through the window, I could see two officers, a young woman and a middle-aged man, approaching Prue and Vernon. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but their body language spoke volumes. Vernon was tense and aggressive, and Prue was waving her arms around, obviously explaining the situation emotionally. The female officer came to my door and knocked. I opened it. Mrs. Winthrop, Officer Reeves, can we talk? I invited her in. She was young, perhaps in her early 30s, with attentive eyes and a calm demeanor. Your daughter says you suddenly cut off all contact with them and refused to communicate. They claim to be concerned about your mental health. I almost laughed. They're concerned about their access to my money, Officer Reeves. I cut off contact after several incidents of financial abuse on their part. I briefly told her about the attempt to use my credit card to buy a car and the events that followed. I see, she nodded. Unfortunately, this is not uncommon. Do you have documentary evidence of these incidents? Bank statements, telephone records. I also consulted with a lawyer, Mr. Bronson of Bronson and Associates. She nodded again. It's good that you took legal action. What do you want to do now? We can simply ask them to leave, or do you want to press charges for trespassing? I thought about it. Did I want my daughter and son-in-law arrested? No. But I also knew that without serious consequences, they might return. I don't want to press charges, I finally said, but I want them to understand that they can't just barge into my life like this. I also want to formally prohibit them from coming onto my property without an invitation. We can issue a verbal warning, Officer Reeves said. If they return after that, you will have grounds for a restraining order. I agreed to this plan. Officer Reeves returned to her partner and Prue and Vernon. Through the window, I could see her talking to them, her posture professional and confident. Prue seemed to be crying, and Vernon looked like he was about to explode with rage. A few minutes later, Officer Reeves returned. They have agreed to leave and not return without invitation. We have explained the consequences of violating this warning. Thank you, I said sincerely. I appreciate your help. Here's my card, she said, handing me her business card. If they return or bother you in any way, call me directly. After the police and Prue and Vernon left, I sat down in a chair, feeling devastated. How did we get to the point where it took police intervention to get my own daughter to leave me alone? Where did I go wrong in raising her? Or was it not me, but her own decisions and character? I made some tea and called Audrey from my new phone. They showed up at your door? She exclaimed when I told her what had happened. And you called the police? God, Beverly, I'm proud of you. I don't know if I should be proud of calling the police on my own daughter, I sighed. You should be when your daughter is acting like a criminal, Audrey said firmly. You set a boundary, and that's important. Prue always thought she could manipulate you and do whatever she wanted. Today, you showed her that's not the case. Her words helped me feel better, but the heaviness in my heart remained. After our conversation, I took out an old photo album and began leafing through it. Prue as a child, a smiling girl with pigtails, so unlike the woman who stood on my porch today with hatred in her eyes. What had changed? When did she turn from a loving child into a selfish, manipulative woman? Was it a gradual process, or were there always signs that I ignored out of love for her? I remembered how Harvey sometimes criticized me for indulging Prue too much. "You're not doing her any favors by always letting her get what she wants," he would say, and I would reply that I just wanted her to be happy. Now I understood that happiness doesn't come from getting everything you want. It comes from being able to appreciate what you have and from healthy relationships based on mutual respect, not financial dependence. The next day, I received a letter from Bronson's law firm with a draft of the new will and power of attorney. I carefully reviewed the documents. I left most of my estate to Audrey and Lisa, with small amounts going to several charities. Prue received a symbolic amount, $1,000, enough to show that I hadn't forgotten her, but not so much as to encourage her behavior. In the power of attorney in case of incapacity, I named Audrey as the decision maker. She was rational, caring, and, importantly, not interested in my money. I knew I could trust her. After signing the documents in front of a notary, I felt that I had completed an important step in the process of regaining my independence. For the first time in a long time, I was making decisions based on my own interests, not on fear of upsetting Prue. That evening, I received an email from Vernon. Unlike his previous emails, which were full of threats and accusations, this one was surprisingly restrained. "Beverly, I want to apologize for my behavior today. It was unacceptable. Prue and I were upset that you cut off contact, but that doesn't excuse our behavior. Please know that we love you and only want to repair our relationship. Vernon." I read the email several times, trying to figure out if it was a sincere apology or another manipulation. Perhaps the police visit had really made them think about their behavior, or, more likely, they realized that intimidation tactics weren't working and decided to try a different approach. In any case, I wasn't in a hurry to respond. Mr. Bronson advised me to keep my distance until I felt completely comfortable with the idea of resuming contact, and I intended to follow that advice. As I went to bed, I felt truly safe in my own home for the first time in a long time. New locks, legal protection, the support of Audrey and Lisa. All of this gave me a sense of security that I hadn't felt since Harvey's death. I didn't know what the future held, but I was sure that I would no longer allow anyone, not even my own daughter, to manipulate or use me. The path to independence was difficult and painful, but necessary, and I was ready to walk it to the end. Spring in Omaha has always been my favorite time of year. After a long winter, the first tulip shoots in the garden seemed like a small miracle. I photographed them every day, documenting their growth, a new hobby that brought unexpected joy to my life. It had been 4 months since I called the police to remove Prue and Vernon from my porch. 4 months since I stopped being an ATM and became just me, Beverly Winthrop, a 67-year-old widow who was finally starting to live for herself. The photography classes at the community center turned out to be just what I needed. Twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I spent 2 hours learning composition, lighting, and shooting techniques under the guidance of Neil Crawford, a former photojournalist who now taught retirees. "You have an eye for detail, Beverly," he said, looking through my pictures of the city park. "You notice things that others miss." I blushed at the compliment. At 67, I blushed at praise like a schoolgirl. It seemed both ridiculous and delightful. Photography gave me not only a new perspective on the world, but also new acquaintances. There were 12 people in our group, all over 60, and we quickly became friends. After class, we often went to a small cafe across the street, where we discussed our photos and shared our life stories over a cup of tea. Gloria Patel, a 72-year-old widow of Indian descent, became a particularly close friend. She had a sharp mind, a wicked sense of humor, and a passion for travel. Beverly, you need to see the world, she would tell me. My Rakesh always put off traveling until later, when the kids are grown, when I retire, when the market stabilizes. And then he died of a heart attack at 59, never having seen the Eiffel Tower. Her words made me think. Harvey and I always put things off too. We saved for a rainy day that never came. Now I had money, time, and, for the first time in my long life, the freedom to do what I wanted. That same evening, I started planning my trip. First, London. I always wanted to see the British Museum and the National Gallery. Then Paris, Rome, maybe even Barcelona. A 2-month European adventure that I had put off for so long. As I booked tickets and hotels, I felt an exciting thrill that I hadn't felt in what seemed like forever. I was going to do something just for myself, without regard for other people's expectations and needs. I hadn't spoken to Prue and Vernon since the day I called the police. For the first few weeks, they tried to contact me. Emails, letters in the mail, even notes left on my door. I didn't respond. Then the contacts became less frequent, and then they stopped altogether. I heard about them through Audrey, who sometimes ran into Prue in town or heard news through mutual friends. You won't believe it, Audrey said during our weekly phone call. Vernon bought his Audi after all. I felt a pang of curiosity. Really? How did they manage that? They took out a huge loan. Prue bragged about it to Carol Jenkins at the grocery store. Apparently, Vernon convinced her that it was an investment in his career. I shook my head, though Audrey couldn't see it. And what are the terms of the loan? From what I heard, terrible. High interest rate, huge monthly payments. Carol said that Prue looked tense when she talked about it. No surprise there, I sighed. They've always lived beyond their means. Yes, but now they have to manage without your financial support, Audrey said with a hint of satisfaction in her voice. And it looks like they're starting to have serious problems. Carol said that Prue mentioned a possible layoff at Vernon's job. I felt a fleeting pang of guilt. Maybe if I had helped them with the down payment, they wouldn't be in such a difficult financial situation. But then I remembered the years of manipulation, lies, and emotional blackmail. No, these were their decisions and their consequences. Lisa saw them last week, Audrey continued. She said Vernon was driving his new Audi, but he looked exhausted, and Prue seems to have lost weight, and not in a good way. She looks worn out. I felt a little sad. Despite everything that had happened, Prue was still my daughter. I didn't want her to suffer, but I also knew that I couldn't go back to the old relationship model, where I was just a means of solving their financial problems. They chose this path themselves, Beverly, Audrey said, as if reading my mind. You warned them about the consequences of living beyond their means. They didn't listen. I agreed, but after the conversation, I still felt a little depressed. To distract myself, I grabbed my camera and headed to a nearby park, a place that had become my refuge over the past few months. It was a clear, warm spring day. The park was full of people, families with children, elderly couples, young people playing frisbee. I found a quiet bench under a cherry tree in bloom and began taking pictures of people passing by, trying to capture moments of unforced happiness. Through the camera lens, I saw a couple sitting on a bench on the opposite side of the pond. Something about their posture caught my attention. The woman was sitting hunched over, her shoulders slumped as if under the weight of an invisible burden. The man next to her was talking, gesturing energetically, his face clearly irritated. I focused the lens and zoomed in, and then it hit me like a bolt of lightning. It was Prue and Vernon. I hadn't seen them in 4 months, but I would have recognized them anywhere. Instinctively, I hid behind a tree, even though I knew they were unlikely to notice me at that distance. Through the lens, I could see that Prue had indeed lost weight. Her face was gaunt, with dark circles under her eyes. Vernon looked much the same as always, perhaps a little more tense. They were clearly arguing. Vernon kept looking at his watch, his lips moving at a rapid, irritated pace. Prue shook her head several times, then suddenly stood up and started to walk away. Vernon grabbed her arm, but she pulled away and continued on her way. After a moment's hesitation, he followed her. I lowered my camera, feeling a strange mixture of emotions. Part of me wanted to go up to them, find out what the problem was, offer help, if not financial, then at least emotional. But another part, a stronger part, reminded me of years of manipulation and that my intervention would only prolong an unhealthy relationship. When I got home, I sat in my garden chair for a long time, thinking about Prue and Vernon. Maybe their financial difficulties would force them to reevaluate their lifestyle. Or would they just find another source of money, a new loan, a new victim of their manipulation? I remembered the words of my therapist, whom I started seeing after the incident with the police. You can't control other people's behavior, even if they are your children. You can only control your own reaction. The next day, I received an email from Prue, the first in several weeks. Mom, I hope you're doing well. I've been thinking a lot about what happened between us. I'm really sorry things turned out this way. I know Vernon and I made a lot of mistakes. Can we meet and talk? I miss you very much. Prue. The letter was simple, without the usual manipulations and hints about financial problems. Maybe she really had changed, or was this a new tactic? I decided not to respond right away. Instead, I went to my photography class, where we had to show our portfolios for an upcoming exhibition. Neil chose 3 of my photos for the exhibition: a picture of an old man feeding pigeons, a little girl jumping over a puddle, and a sunset over the Missouri River. You're making amazing progress, Beverly, he said. There's real emotional depth in your work. Gloria came up after class, her eyes shining with excitement. My kids gave me a Mediterranean cruise for my birthday, a 2-week trip in July. And you know what? I can bring a friend. You have to come with me. I was touched by the offer. Gloria, that's very generous, but I already have a trip to Europe planned. Perfect, she exclaimed. You can start with the cruise and then continue your trip. We'll see Barcelona, Nice, Rome, Athens. Just imagine how many photos we'll take. Her enthusiasm was contagious. Besides, the idea of starting the trip with someone else rather than alone was appealing. Okay, I agreed. Let's do it. On the way home, I stopped at the mall to buy a new swimsuit and summer dresses for the trip. As I was walking past the electronics department, I saw Vernon. He was standing at the counter with expensive headphones, looking at the price tags with obvious interest. I quickly turned away, hoping he hadn't noticed me, but it was too late. Our eyes met across the room. His face showed surprise, then awkwardness, and finally something resembling a smile. He raised his hand in a hesitant greeting. I nodded in response but didn't approach him. He remained where he was, too. We both understood that we weren't ready for this encounter. After a few seconds, I turned around and walked in the opposite direction, feeling my heart pounding. That evening, I reread Prue's letter. After meeting Vernon at the mall, I was curious to know how they were doing, not out of a desire to return to our former relationship, but simply out of human interest. After much thought, I wrote a short reply. Prue, thank you for your letter. I'm doing well. I'm glad you're thinking about the past. I'm not ready to meet in person right now, but we can keep in touch by email. Beverly. I signed my name, not Mom, consciously putting some distance between us. We were still related by blood, but the nature of our relationship had changed forever. The reply came an hour later. Thank you for responding. I understand your reluctance to meet in person. Email correspondence is a start. Vernon and I are going through difficult times. The car loan payments are huge, and Vernon's workplace is planning layoffs. But we'll get through it. I got a second job on the weekends. Prue. I noted that she didn't ask for money, even though she mentioned financial difficulties. Maybe it was progress or subtle manipulation. Either way, I wasn't going to go back to being the rescuer. The next morning, I met with Gloria to plan our cruise. We sat in her bright, cozy living room, studying brochures and maps. Have you ever been to Greece? She asked, showing me photos of Santorini with its distinctive white and blue houses. Never, I shook my head. My husband and I always put off traveling until later. And now later has arrived, she smiled. You know, Beverly, when Rakesh died, I thought my life was over. 45 years of marriage, and suddenly, emptiness. But then I realized I had a choice to spend the rest of my years in mourning or to create a new life for myself. I nodded, understanding her feelings completely. That's exactly what I'm trying to do now. Create a new life, not only without Harvey, but also without certain toxic relationships. Gloria looked at me with understanding. I told her about the situation with Prue and Vernon in general terms, without going into details. Sometimes the greatest love we can show our children is to allow them to face the consequences of their own decisions, she said. Her words resonated deeply with me. All my life, I thought I was protecting Prue from hardship, but in reality, I was depriving her of the opportunity to learn and grow. We continued planning the trip, and by the end of the day, all the details were finalized. We were going on a cruise in 2 weeks, and then I would continue on my own trip through Europe. At home, I found another letter from Prue. I often think about how we've grown apart. Remember how you used to take me to the park every Saturday when I was little? And how we fed the ducks? I miss those times so much. Vernon says I should give you space, but I find it hard to accept that my own mother doesn't want to see me. The emotional manipulation was back, subtle but recognizable. I felt a pang of guilt, but then I remembered my therapist's words that healthy relationships are not based on guilt. I decided not to respond right away. Instead, I took out my camera and started looking through the photos I had taken. Hundreds of images of the new life I was building, friends from the photography club, flowers in my garden, birds at the feeder I installed this spring, sunsets over Omaha. Each photo was a small celebration of the freedom I had found. Among them were pictures taken in the park when I accidentally saw Prue and Vernon. In one photo, Prue was looking into the distance with an expression of such deep fatigue and sadness that my heart ached. She was my daughter, flesh of my flesh, and despite all the manipulation and deception, I still loved her. But loving someone doesn't mean letting them use you. It was a lesson I learned too late, but I learned it nonetheless. Maybe someday Prue will understand the difference between love and dependence, between support and exploitation. For now, I had to continue on my path of independence and self-respect. I wrote a short reply. Prue, I remember those days in the park too. But people change, relationships evolve. I'm not closing the door forever, but right now I need space and time. I'm going on a trip for a few months and will only be in touch occasionally. I hope you and Vernon find a solution to your financial problems. Beverly. I didn't offer help, promise future meetings, or sign off with love. I simply stated the facts and set boundaries. That was exactly what I had learned over the past few months. As I packed my suitcases for the trip, I felt a strange lightness. It was as if I was not only packing clothes, but also leaving years of emotional baggage behind. For the first time in a long time, I truly felt free. Free from manipulation, from guilt, from toxic family ties. My new life was full of possibilities. the trips I had always wanted to take, the photography I had always wanted to study, friends with whom I could be myself, without having to constantly give and never receive anything in return. I didn't know what my life would be like in a year or two. Would my relationship with Prue ever be restored on a new, healthier basis? Or would we remain polite strangers, connected only by shared blood and memories of the past? But I knew one thing for sure. I would never go back to a life where my worth was measured only by what I could give to others. I deserved better. And, oddly enough, Prue deserved more too. A chance to become a self-sufficient, independent woman, rather than an eternal child waiting for her mother to solve all her problems. Maybe one day she would understand that. In the meantime, I was going to live my life to the fullest and without regrets, enjoying the freedom I had put off for so long.